Neil Mauman, Executive Vice President and founder of Every Black Life Matters. For Black History Month this year, we've been looking at people who've had the great influence on blacks and on black plight. Today I want to talk about Lyndon Johnson. Johnson is an intriguing character because while he did sign the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, he was an established racist. Nobody denies this. But a president being racist doesn't doom our entire ethnicity. The problem was what he did and why he did it. Though a racist, LBJ saw the civil rights movement as inevitable, and thus he saw blacks as a dangerous voting bloc because they voted Republican, because the Republicans had freed the slaves. His words, according to historian Doris Kearns Goodwin, were, "These Negroes, they're getting pretty uppity these days, and that's a problem for us, since they've got something now they never had before, the political pull to back up their uppityness. Now, we've got to do something about this. We've got to give them a little something, just enough to quiet them down, not enough to make a difference. For if we don't move at all, then their allies will line up against us, and there'll be no way of stopping them. We'll lose the filibuster, and there'll be no way of putting on a break." End quote. You see, LBJ knew that the black vote was going to be a deal breaker for the Democrats. They were going to lose every single election as a result. So he came up with an idea. He said, "I'll have them," and he used a derogatory name for blacks here, "I'll have them, blank, voting Democrat for 200 years. But what did he do and how did he plan that? Well, he focused on getting black families to sign up for the new socialist welfare laws that he had just created, the supposed Great Society. It was meant to incentivize voters, especially blacks, to vote Democrat. Well, hidden in this new law to help people was the law designed to enslave people and keep them dependent on handouts. If you were a racist and hated blacks that you saw were going to achieve and excel, what could you do to destroy their culture? What could you do to destroy their motivation? Could you do to keep them dependent on handouts? Well, you would destroy the families. After all, that's what slave owners did, right? Separate families to keep blacks weak, to keep them needing the police force to control them. LBJ's welfare law gave more money to women if there was no father in the home. In other words, women were incentivized to kick fathers out if they were earning less than the government was willing to hand out. And sadly, it worked its deadly curse. Before LBJ, fatherlessness in the black community was about 30%. Today, fatherlessness is about 72%. In fact, you can trace black plight directly to this. Fatherless families mean young men and women grow up looking for that father figure. Studies show that young men join gangs to seek approval of older males. Young women become sexually promiscuous, looking for male approval. The family breaks down further. Fatherless kids fare worse in school. Worse, drugs and gangs bring violence into public schools. Teachers become helpless to stem the tide. Schools stop teaching, and kids graduate with the ability to read and write. Some statistics show that at the height of racism, the literacy rate amongst blacks was about 70%. So racism was not the cause of low literacy. That meant 70% of blacks could read and write enough to hold a job. Today, tragically, the literacy rate is closer to 18% amongst blacks in inner cities. Number 3, with almost 72% of all blacks being unable to read or write, they are unable to get jobs. But to add insult to injury, socialists insist on raising the minimum wage to a level where businesses can't earn enough if they hire a person who can't read. So, what do? They don't hire them. As Thomas Sowell says, the effective minimum wage for inner city kids is 0. Why? Because they will never be able to earn enough to their employer to justify the minimum wage. You see, all these problems could be fixed if Congress was willing to stop these socialist programs. If there are racists in power, they are all socialists. And folks who keep continuing LBJ's plan to keep black folk dependent and voting for them for the next 200 years. Remember, there are many ways to keep a person a slave and depend on you. You can force a man to work and never pay him, or you can pay a man to never work and be dependent on you. So this Black History Month, we ask that you remember the men and women who are responsible for black plight and decide that it's time you stop them and their policies, because every black life matters.